Hello, everybody, and welcome, maybe back or maybe welcome to, depending on if you came to part one or not. But I see many of you are familiar names from the first session, so welcome back to part two. I'm Dr. Lauren Kaiser, and I'm here with my co-presenters, and we'll do our introduction in just a minute. But this is part two, so we're shifting gears. Part one was more about kind of the relationship building and the process aspects of instructional consultation. And this part is now shifting to talking more specifically about, the problem solving aspect, specifically around the instructional assessment, around the academic concerns. Obviously we are in a time now where we're really concerned about students academically. They have many gaps typically we have students that we need to support academically, but now we may have more than ever because of the gaps of instruction or the different types of instruction that we're experiencing. We know that there may have been more of a summer slide than normal this past year, and now we're going into maybe a fall slide. So we also know that PDE as well as ASP have advocated against the use of invalid assessment procedures, in this moment, and making decisions about students in terms of special eligibility, that we may need to kind of slow down on that. But that gives us an opportunity to think about, well, what can we be doing to be, to use the term I often hear Dr. Peterson and Dr. Lillenstein say, generally useful, right, in this moment. And so the instructional consultation model, we thought it would be helpful to share that with you today, because it's something that could be particularly useful. And many of my students in my consultation class are right now even thinking about how to use this in terms of teleconsultation. So if we have time at the end, we'll talk a little bit about that. So let's get right in here. So today, this objective of part two then is focusing more on what is the instructional consultation model. For any of you who might have missed part one, we'll try to go over that a little more briefly because I don't want to take up a lot of time on that for those people that already heard about it. You can always go back and watch the video of part one if you missed that. And then more specifically to get into what are the three skills of instructional consultation, but specifically focusing on the problem solving skills and the instructional assessment portion of the process. Because we want you to be able to leave either being able to define the concept of instructional match if you hadn't heard about it before, but many of you have heard it, so we may just want to review and deepen your understanding by mostly spending time today giving you an opportunity to hear 4 different case studies, actually. Yep, 4 different case studies from instructional consultation in reading, different aspects of reading concerns. So you can get a picture of what it might look like for different types of problems. And then, of course, we'll try to leave some time to talk about how we can help support teachers in this returning to school. Recognizing that if this is maybe your first time getting into instructional consultation, this is kind of awareness level training. And if this is something you're interested in, we could always talk about what follow-up training might look like. But if those of you who are already pretty skilled in it know it, this will just give you a little bit of that extra information that you might need. Oh, I don't know why my animation isn't working here. I'm going to pull everybody up. There we go. But so I'm Dr. Lauren Kaiser, and I'm an assistant professor of the school psych program here at Millersville University. I feel actually very happy to be here today instead of at home. I love my kids, but we've been all working remotely academically at home. But I did my training at University of Maryland College Park, where I had the good fortune of training under the mentorship of Dr. Sylvia Rosenfield, who's the developer of the instructional consultation model. And so, I've already told my life story in session 1, so I won't be repeating that. But the short version is I come from being a teacher. So, of course, the instructional aspect of our role as school psych is really interesting to me and important because I realize how necessary it is for teachers. And so I was very fortunate also to spend some time on the road with Dr. Ed Gickling and Dr. Todd Gravois doing some training in instructional consultation and assessment, and have come full circle now to train these amazing students and practitioners here that you see. And so I'm going to let them each introduce themselves. They really wowed me in their first class in consultation with their very first cases. So today you're going to hear about each of their cases or most of their cases in consultation. And so I wanted them to get a chance to introduce themselves real quickly. Let's see. Go ahead, Bailey.
Hello, I'm Bailey Gibson. I am a third-year student at Millersville, so I'm in my internship year, and I am currently completing that down in Maryland at the Harford County Public Schools.
Hi, I'm Katie Fritz. I am a former student. I graduated in May, and I am currently working at Pequea Valley School District in Lancaster County.
Hi, my name is Chrislyn. I'm also a former student of Dr. Kaiser's, and I'm a former intern of Dr. Peterson's. And I'm working at the Elanco School District in my first year as a practitioner here for 7 through 12 and the emotional support population.
Hi everyone, I'm Hannah Lombardo. I am a school psychologist intern at Eastern Lancaster County School District. So I get to work with Chrislyn all the time, so amazing. And I'm the senior as Bailey, so we're wrapping up our internship year, our third and final year. But really excited to be here. Thanks.
Great. So in the last session, we did a brief poll. So if you were there, you know how to do this. If you weren't, you'll just go to your view options, which should be in the top control panel of your screen, and where you see annotate, you would click annotate, and it should give you stamp option right here. And we're going to stamp it up a little bit. As I said in the first session, I made my little election day joke, although it's really not feeling that funny today, but that, you know, polls are a little triggering. So we're not going to do a poll, but we are going to use our stamps. So first I want to know, did you attend part 1? Yes or no? You guys got the hang of it? Good. And I actually learned how to erase that over the break. So this is also really exciting. All right, so most of you attended that. That's good to know. While we're filling this out, and a few people who maybe didn't attend are letting us know, we went at a rapid pace in that first session. What questions did we not get to cover that you wanted to ask? I want to make sure that we do allow time for that in this part 2. You can post that in the chat while we're doing the rest of this poll. I'm going to continue on with the poll, but I did want to allow some time for that to kind of emerge. And so we can kind of look to see where those questions might fit throughout the presentation and weave them in however we need to. But most of you, yeah, did attend. So this is great. There's only a few of you who didn't. And I will just say, if you didn't attend, some parts of it, we're going to try to do a little bit of brief review to catch you up, but some of it was more exhaustively overviewed in the first one. So just make sure you catch our video. I think Ask will be posting those all later. All right, so if you had questions, again, pop them in the chat. Oh, great, thank you. Someone else cleared it for me. So what is your role? School psych, graduate student, faculty, other? I know I see a lot of my current students here. Thank you all for supporting us. Hope this isn't too much of a review of what we do in class, but some of you, it might be a preview if you're a new student. Lots of school psychs, good. Okay, lots of grad students. I don't see any other. If you are in the other category, you can pop that in the chat. All right, let's keep moving. And we'll clear that up. Good, all right, what is your experience with consultation? Most of you came to the earlier one, so I'm gonna guess we're gonna have a lot of team consultation, a lot of behavioral consultation, some folks who have heard of it, but haven't got to try it yet. Okay. Just curious, those of you who uses it regularly in their practice, if you don't mind me calling you out, I'd love to know who I'm preaching to when I preach to the choir here. You want to type that in, I'd love to hear who has a little bit of experience doing this and how that's going. If anyone's doing teleconsultation, we'd love to hear about that and highlight that too. I'm not seeing a lot of folks writing in the chat, which is okay if you don't want to say anything, but if you do, I just want to make sure that there's not a tech issue that I'm not able to see what's in the chat. So if any presenters are seeing what's in the chat. Thanks, Tina. Glad you love consultation. That I can always tell that about you. All right, let's clear this one. And okay, now what's your experience with IC? Okay, I see a lot. Kevin, you do a lot of behavioral consultation. That's great. And so maybe today we might layer in a little concept of instructional consultation that you can maybe begin to add to your FBA toolbox as well. All right. So we've had some folks have some brief awareness. Some folks have practiced it, but don't necessarily use it yet. So again, that's kind of what we saw in that first session, and we're going to try to kind of move from knowing to doing. Okay, let's keep going then. Awesome. So then the next question I didn't ask in part 1 is, how many of you have heard of Ed Gickling's instructional assessment model? If you have some awareness of it, if you've actually been trained in it and you use that as part of your process. Daniel, I see that you specifically use consultation in your day with teachers of students with autism spectrum disorder. I don't know if you know of the work of Liz McKenney, but she does a lot on consultation specifically around ASD. So if you don't know her work, I can always help get that to you. She wrote a book on it recently, actually. So really interesting work she's doing. All right, so now most people have heard about instructional consultation, but less around instructional assessment. So we're gonna talk more, I think, in depth today about that instructional assessment aspect of it. And I think that's the part that differentiates it from other models that you might be more familiar with, like behavioral consultation. So here we go. We have the NASP practice. NASP asserts that, consultation is a permeating practice, and it's basically our way of delivering evidence-based academic interventions and supports, which often, which we'll see today with some of our research, academic interventions done really well can also be a really good mental and behavioral health intervention for many kids, because for kids in schools, their academic self-competence is or their self-esteem and self-competence is often tied into how they're doing in school. And if the work is too easy or too hard, that can have a lot to do with just how they feel about coming to school too. So we're going to talk about how that aspect of our role can be brought together. So what's the evidence base? So instructional consultation has been around since the 1980s. 1987 was when Dr. Sylvia Rosenfield first introduced the model with her book, which actually I just learned she wrote on her Atari. That's a fun fact. I just read an article by her, Women in Psychology or School Psychology biography, and I never knew that as long as I've known her. But anyway, moving on from that, but she was really interested in developing the model to enhance the work that school psychologists do to serve students academically. And so some of the research that's been done about instructional consultation specifically has found that it has been found to increase student goal attainment. So the goals that the teachers set, a high degree of students, at least over 80% from program evaluation research across multiple schools of students end up meeting the goals that the teachers and the consultants set for them. There are some quasi-experimental studies that have shown that IC moves the needle on reading achievement at the classroom level and then also at the individual student level. It also decreases special education referral rates and then improves what we call the hit rate, which is a really poor term, but basically what that means is that students who are getting referred for special education are also then found eligible, meaning there's not a lot of kind of wasted time in assessment that doesn't end up in some kind of a placement, which from a time and a cost benefit analysis can be a major cost without a lot of benefit necessarily. And so we find then also then it decreases the disproportionality in referrals and placements. Why? Well, because teachers are becoming more objective as they're problem solving. And then they start to see what the student can do, and the student makes progress, and they realize a special education evaluation isn't necessarily warranted. And then we talked a lot about this in the first session, so I'm not going to talk about this here, but that there's a lot of research to support that I see as helpful in increasing teacher efficacy. So their confidence, and not only their general instructional efficacy, but their efficacy for serving students who are different from them or students that they perceive to be more challenging. And that is from experimental design research, where 17 schools received IC training and implementation, and 17 schools did not. That's hard to get that kind of experimental design research and consultation. And then we also see from quasi-experimental research that teachers' instructional practices, at least their self-reported instructional practices, change as a result of consultation. So it's a good thing. I don't need to sell you on it though. So let's move on. So the history and background, most of you did attend the first session. So I can move very quickly to say it's all coming from the work of Sylvia Rosenfield. She's developed this over the years. There's a new book, if you haven't learned about it yet, that you might find interesting, by Newman and Rosenfield, where they coin it school consultation. Why? Because we want to be flexible with the use of instructional and behavioral problem solving. And so it has roots. We talked over in part 1 in behavioral problem solving, consultee-centered consultation, having a multicultural school consultation framework by which we work, process approach where we're humble in our inquiry. And so we really strive to build collaborative, equal, non-judgmental, non-evaluative relationships to do this difficult work, which is talking about your instruction, which can be very personal to teachers. And they can often, they work hard and with good intentions to help serve their kids. And so if it doesn't go well, it can be very delicate to have a conversation about that. And so we need to have a process that supports those kinds of discussions. But for today, we're really going to focus on the work of Ed Gickling, who some of you are familiar of, but you haven't really heard in depth. We're going to talk about what does the instructional assessment process look like as it's embedded in that instructional consultation model. And then, we could always talk about how this looks as a team. Today, you're going to be learning about what might it look like for us as school psychologists to do it individually with teachers, but just recognizing that there is a team approach that's out there where a whole team of folks can be trained to do this work. So that way you as a school psychologist are not the lone person and feeling like I don't have time to get to every teacher who needs help. It can be embedded in a team approach. And for more on that, you can go to icatresources.com. But for today, we're focusing kind of on the individual consultation model with the goal being to enhance and improve and increase student performance, because we're talking today about student reading performance, but really also staff performance in being able to be more certain about reading assessment and reading intervention and how to develop those skills and expertise and instructional quality around creating instructional matches in reading specifically. So we're talking about how to help teachers help their kids. And there's lots of assumptions behind the model. Again, we went over many of them in the first session, but the one here we're going to focus on is this instructional match is foundational and should be the focus of our problem solving. And we're going to define that. We're going to give you some examples and show you some interesting research of instructional match, which is really shifting that concept that if a kid is having difficulty learning, it's not because something's wrong with the child. It's not a disability focus. It's not a deficit focus, but it's really that Bronfenbrenner's ecological model approach that, there's probably something with the curriculum and in the instruction that if we can adjust that, we can make some really good gains. Okay. So the 3 skills. Instructional consultation really can be boiled down to 3 sets of skills, as we said in part 1. In part 1, we focused on the collaborative communication skills that a consultant would need to really support a teacher through being stressed, lacking objectivity. And in this session, we're going to focus on the problem-solving steps, specifically, what does that instructional assessment look like? And then for those of you that know behavioral consultation, it's important to see, I'm not saying throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? Behavioral consultation and behavioral problem solving, keep that up. Now all you need to do is begin to embed this concept of instructional assessment. And then eventually your instructional design, your intervention design would be perhaps an instructional intervention or an academic intervention. The good news is if we follow this process, it embeds behavioral problem solving. Layering in the instructional assessment allows you to solve both kinds of problems flexibly. And in a way that doesn't necessarily separate them, right? Like, oh, this is an academic concern, this is a behavior concern, but really seeing how an academic concern and behavioral concern might be intertwined. So here is the actual IC problem solving process with all the sub-steps. So the other one was just like a quick overview of the major stages, but this is the business that goes on within each stage. So in the contracting stage, which isn't necessarily a distinct part of behavioral consultation, although I do understand that many people who do behavioral consultation still spend time with the teacher building rapport. But in IC, it's a specific part of the process where before you even start talking about the student, you talk about the steps you're going to go through together. And you talk about how this process is really going to be maybe a little different than other kind of problem solving that's been done before, because we're going to take an approach that is going to think about instructional match from the outset and think about instructional variables and letting the teacher know that that's okay. We know that being a teacher is really hard and really challenging. And this is a non-judgmental, non-evaluative approach. It's not saying something's wrong with your teaching, but just recognizing the fact that right now, if this student isn't performing the way that you hope, and if they're not behaving the way that you hope, it could be due to a mismatch that we haven't figured out yet, and we can just 2 heads better than 1 figure it out together. So that would be that first conversation, and dealing with the issues of time and whose role is it to do the intervention and whose role is it to collect data. And, once you talk about all of that, then seeing if the teacher is still interested, because ultimately it has to be a voluntary process for it to be effective. And then to begin scheduling, because then weekly meetings happen. So you would meet once a week in this model. Now, each stage is not necessarily a week, though. The length of the process depends on the concern, the teacher, how well you're implementing it, all of that. And so the next stage would be problem identification and analysis, where then you do sit with the teacher, and using those collaborative communication skills we talked about earlier, you'd get clear on the concern, get it more specific and observable, decide to do instructional assessment. Usually you do about 3 instructional assessments together. And if it's a behavioral concern, you might also layer in some of that functional behavioral thinking and assessment that we know so well. And then ultimately be able to prioritize, come up with a baseline, and then set a short-term goal. Then you and the teacher together collaboratively would talk about what strategy would be best for the assessed area of need, thinking about when and how often that needs to occur for it to be successful, and then making sure that whatever you design is an instructional match. And then the other big question, which we're going to see a great example of today, is asking the teacher, who else could benefit from this? We've been working all along around maybe one student, but are there other kids in your class that could benefit from this? Or do you see this having value if we worked on this with the whole class? And if the teacher thinks broader, that really has a bigger impact in terms of consultee change and outcomes. And it might have more impact on students too. And also, if it can be truly embedded in instruction, it's going to be much more acceptable for the teacher and feasible to do. And so that conversation happens in this stage. And also what's interesting about consultation, what we found is teachers are much more likely to generalize skills in consultation if you just ask that question. If you don't ask it, it leaves it up to chance and they're less likely to do it. So asking that's important. And then, of course, progress monitoring, which I think we all know so well, and then closing out when the student meets that goal of theirs, or if they haven't met it, then we go back through the process. It's not as linear as it appears here. It's got a lot of circles and arrows depending on if things don't go as planned. There is a document which we use to keep track of the work, which we're not going to overly focus on how to use it here, especially because there's probably a more tech savvy way to do this now, but it is, it's called the student documentation form. And actually ICAT Resources has recently changed it to be the consultant documentation form, or the consultation documentation form, which I like. The shift in language is important because it's taking it away from the student focus to consultation focus. But basically you're identifying the concern and prioritizing and keeping track of your baseline and your goals, and ultimately graphing baseline and then graphing progress, keeping track of whatever the intervention plan is here. So let's get to the meat here, instructional match. All right, first we have a little interactive part that should be fun for you all. Take a look here. Let's see, I gotta clear all these pictures. All right, in an empty room are a candle, some matches, a box of tacks. The goal is to have the lit candle about 5 feet off the ground. You've tried melting some of the wax on the bottom of the candle and sticking it to the wall, but that wasn't effective. How can you get the lit candle to be 5 feet off the ground without your having to hold it there? If you've heard this before and you have prior knowledge, don't share it yet. Only write it in the chat if you're given your actual guesses. Just sit with this for a minute. We got some creative thinkers there. You can't tack the candle to the wall. Your tack is probably not going to be that big. Tina, ask your son to hold it. You're in the room by yourself, I should say. We got to make this hard. Create a circle of tacks on the wall and put the candle in it. Interesting. Ah, Anne, you've got it. You're like, darn. But yeah, if you dump out the tacks and you tack the box to the wall, and you can put the candle in the box, you can do it. But that was very good. And do you have prior knowledge? Have you seen this before? No. Okay, good. Very good. I was like, how did you get that? So that's really good problem solving. The interesting thing about this is this actually comes from the work of Daniel Willingham, who is a cognitive psychologist, educational psychologist. And he says 20 minutes is usually the max, but people won't usually come up with it that quick. You must be really advanced, Anne. Holly says, no, I'm a guy. But 20 minutes is usually about how long people will try to think about this solution, and then they'll give up. Some of you might have already done that anyway, but I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to check my email over here while we have this discussion. And so Willingham uses this example to make the point, and actually he's the author of a really good book if you haven't read it yet. It's called Why Students Don't Like School. Actually, I think I have it here behind me. But he posits that, kids don't really love school because in general, humans don't really love thinking if it's too hard. We're naturally curious, but we're not naturally good thinkers unless the conditions are just right. We'll want to avoid thinking. And I just love this example because it really gets at the concept of, frustrational level perhaps, or maybe instructional level for folks of you who are really into this kind of abstract problem solving. So this concept of instructional match is hopefully not new to us in school psych. Matt Burns writes and talks about it a lot. Burns and Parker have a CBA ID book. And in that book, they talk about reasons why kids are frustrated. They have a nice chapter on instructional match. And that, completing a task, if it's too difficult, they're going to get frustrated. If they have to learn too much, so it might not be that hard, but it has a cognitive load of a lot of new information being shared. And that Gickling also talks about lack of sufficient challenge, and that if it's too easy, it's also going to pose problems. So if something's not too easy, or if it's I say the Goldilocks principle, it's too hot, too cold, just right. It needs to be just right. And that's the concept of Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, right? You know that when I'm going to go through this real quickly. I'm looking at my time. I got to make sure I got to give my presenters full time to share their cases. But it is that concept of the sweet spot, basically, between what does the student know and the task demands, and then the instructional delivery variables. And these numbers here just kind of show the variance in student learning. 50 to 60% is based on student prior knowledge. So we grade students based on what they come in knowing. That's why I asked Anne, did she already know that, right? But the thing is, we actually control, that sounds like a lot is out of our control as teachers, but we can control the instruction and the task to a high degree. Okay. I do like to show this real quickly and then we'll move. But this idea that instructional level is easy to find in a book is kind of a misnomer. You might just look here, these two passages. What's your guess on what grade level these two passages are? Put that in the chat just real quick. If I've shown you this before, just hang. Oh, I know I've got some of my students here. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. What grade level would that be if we had a runner readability? And then you got George Washington. Really, said Annie? Wait, don't go far. Okay, we got someone says maybe 8th. So fourth and fifth, 8th. Yeah, that first passage, maybe, yeah, really you're thinking maybe high level. The second passage, what do you think about that one? Eight for both, maybe second. Yeah, well, if some of you are recognizing the names, you might actually recognize this is Jack and Annie. That might help you kind of be like, oh, okay, that's the Magic Treehouse series. So that's actually really what might more like a 3rd grade text. But within this, we would see that actually this is on a readability is 4th grade. But I actually agree with you. This is actually in terms of concepts, like you might be able to read the words here at a 4th grade level. But in terms of really understanding what does a sunshine patriot mean, that is probably 8th, 9th grade from a vocabulary and concept standpoint. And then this passage here is 1st grade readability, but it's all within the same 2nd to 3rd grade level text. So this is the challenge teachers face day in, day out. We can give them a nice little, progress report for which instructional level, meaning grade level, the student's on, and they'll go get the book from the book bin or the book closet, and they'll give the child the book, and then the child will either have a behavioral issue, rolling on the floor, not wanting to read it when they get to this paragraph here, and then they'll lean in and be much more engaged here, but the teacher might not necessarily understand why. Yeah, Kevin, you're right. The grammar structure here is much more challenging. And so this is the challenge that teachers face on a day-to-day basis. So we're redefining instructional level as not being a grade level, a passage level on a book, right? So it's not kind of like a 1R in a graded book series, but it's this concept of what does the student know in relationship to that task. And this comes from the work of several others. Miller et al. Did the cognitive load of working memory, saying that 7 plus or minus 2 is kind of our working memory capacity as adults. We can hold on to about 7 pieces of new information, and within a window of plus or minus 2. But working memory is limited in that capacity. It's also limited in duration, about 20 to 30 seconds if we don't rehearse it, and it clears itself automatically when it's overloaded. So if we keep trying to add more, we're going to lose what we already had. So that's an important concept to keep in mind. And then drill and practice is those ratios where we know that kids are going to learn the material and retain it better if they're rehearsing it at 70 to 85% known. They're going to be more likely to remember it than if they did at 100% unknown, which, we all went to school that way, right? I learned botany in my class in college, and I passed the test with an A, but I don't remember any of the different classes of plants at all because I studied at 100% unknown. And then this concept of comprehension, that's from the work of Betts, saying that comprehension will falter if students know less than 93% of the words on the page. And so if they know less than that, then they won't be able to make sense of what they're reading. They're going to look like they're disfluent readers, and they're going to look like they don't have comprehension skills. If we can get them in this zone, they might actually be able to look like they know a lot more and answer the questions more validly. So let's take a look real quickly. Read this passage to yourself. And once you're done, I'll ask you a few questions. Okay, gave you about 1 minute. Timed your correct words per minute. How's your fluency? Did you get through it all? Was your fluency affected? If so, why? Where did you get stuck? I have the luxury here of knowing where you might have gotten stuck here. A classroom teacher might not. Let me check your comprehension real quickly. What was this story about? Put it in the chat. The Blimblatt, of course. Very good, Jennifer. You're right. So Jennifer has good comprehension. Or does she? Jennifer, what's the Blimblatt? Holly says maybe being in line at the store. She's got part of it. Kevin says maybe a roller coaster. So you're making some inferences here, but your accuracy and comprehension is fairly low. Other than Jennifer, who was able to repeat a story from the text, which is what a lot of our kids will do, right? They'll give the words back, but they have no idea what it actually means, right? And so if I'm grading your comprehension, I might say, oh, this student has a processing problem. They're not able to comprehend this material. I know they can read it. But yeah, you're limited by your background knowledge and your vocabulary because some of these words are not real words, right? They're made up words. And I know as a teacher that if I tell you Blimblatt is a circus, now you're like, oh, okay, right? I know Tomely is father, right? Plam is family. Now you're going to start to answer some of my questions. If I say, now what's it about, right? Going back to Holly, Holly would probably be able to give a more accurate answer, right, Holly? Are they in line at the store? Where are they in line? Just gonna type it. She's probably saying it. They're in line to buy tickets, yes, for the Blimblat, which we now know is the circus, right? And so now your comprehension is coming into focus. Well, that's because I could teach you a few words. Now, what percentage of known words do you think this is? Anybody want to take a guess? Some people are saying 90, someone said 80. You're right if I say 80. Yeah, someone can count real quick to figure it out, right? But yes, this is 80% known. So that's frustrational level. So it's too hard. Your comprehension faltered. And I really probably, if I measured your fluency, it probably wasn't great because you did probably stop and wonder at some of those words. And if I, assess your comprehension, it wouldn't be great, but I would have been assessing it at frustrational level condition, not at instructional level. And so by teaching a few words, I was able to just elevate it enough that if I had you reread it and if I asked you questions, you would be a much stronger reader in terms of your fluency and your comprehension skills. So that's kind of Gickling's premise behind the instructional match. That, it's that just right level where we have a high degree of success and a small, reasonable margin of challenge to make it an appropriate fit or a comfort zone. So it is very similar to that concept of Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, what the learner can do, but with a little bit of assistance. And so here's just some visuals. I'm going to breeze through them real quickly with that concept that we talked about with working memory, connected with what does the child already know, is part of that piece of making an instructional level. And we're all in Pennsylvania, so we know what happens when you don't have a keystone, everything falls apart. So that instructional level becomes pivotal. One of my favorite pieces of research from 1978, which is now vintage, but it has been replicated in 2007 by Burns and others, or Treptow and others, is they went into classrooms in first grade and Gickling did observations of student comprehension of their work, their accuracy, on-task behavior, and completion. And you can see that, kids didn't really understand what they were doing. They completed it, but they were off task about half of the time. So Gickling and his colleague did assessments with each child in the class to find out what did they know and what can they do. And they created tasks that were too hard, tasks that were just right at instructional level, that 93 to 97%, and tasks that were too easy. You're school psychs, you're good at reviewing data. What do you see here? That's really interesting. I'll kind of keep talking while maybe you're putting in the chat in the interest of time, but what I love about this is in frustrational level, the child struggled with everything: comprehension, completion, task behavior. Instructional level, everything was great. They understood it, they completed it, and they were on task to a high degree. But yeah, Katie, you're exactly right. Once it was too easy, we had an opposite problem. They did the work and they understood it, but they had time to disengage, to either goof off, either I hurry up and rush and I have a lot of extra time on my hands, or I wait because I know I can get it done. And so when we go in to do on-task observations in the classroom, we don't always know which condition we're under. We just know maybe the child's off task. So this instructional assessment is really important to the problem solving, to know, maybe why is the student tuning out? Why are they disengaging? Is it because this material isn't at the just right level? And then once we know that, what's the best intervention instructionally and behaviorally? From this research, it looks like instructional match is the best academic and behavioral intervention. All right, I'm going to move on. Instructional hierarchy is important. We need that in our instructional design. But the one thing I want to just talk about briefly is the IA. So the IA is designed to assess all of the different factors of reading. Teaching you about all the different dimensions of reading is beyond the scope of today's talk. But hopefully you continue to get training on that if you haven't yet, but most of you I'm hoping are coming with a background on the National Reading Panel and the different dimensions of reading that make students good readers. But the IA is designed to answer questions about each of those dimensions, to find out what does the student know in each of those dimensions, what can they do? It's a strengths-based assessment. How does the student think? What do they do when they're unsure? And then now as the teacher, or really as the school psych helping the teacher, what do we do about it? What do we want to prioritize? Recognizing that if we're assessing them in frustrational level conditions, it'll all look like a problem. That whole star will be really blurry and it seems like the child is just struggling. But if we can assess them in instructional level conditions, we can pinpoint which of the points of the star is most at need. And if we can, give it a match at that point, we can increase their learning. So the IA, it takes a lot of training. That was what Matt Burns actually even said, that was one of the criticisms of the approach. You have to be trained by one of the gurus to really know it. And so I will say that does require some modeling and some practice, but it's done with the teacher. It's different than any other assessment that we ever do. You don't do it on your own down the hall in your own closet of an office. You do it in the teacher's classroom so they can see and be a part of it. You do it with their classroom material. It is curriculum neutral in the sense that you are going to, if they're a science teacher, you're going to use their science textbook. If they're a reading teacher, you'll use their reading materials. Even if they teach math, you'll get out their math worksheets and you'll look at the math worksheets. Whatever it is, you're going to assess at whatever the grade level expectation is. And if they're in any leveled material, you'll have that available too. When the student comes in, you're going to let them know this is a different kind of assessment. It's not a test. You're not going to be graded. We're looking for what you know and what you can do. If we get to stuff you don't know, we're not going to worry about that. You're helping me and your teacher know how to help kids learn and do better in school. So thank you for helping us, right? You need to kind of frame it like that. Then the first thing is really reading aloud to the student. Get them comfortable, feeling success because they don't have to immediately start reading. And then you're gauging their listening, responding, asking them open-ended questions like, tell me about what I just read. And if they can give you an elaborate retell, mark that down and move on. If they need more specific questioning, you ask aided questions, who, what, when, where. You might give some multiple choices. You might even go back to the text. You're trying to see what they can do instructionally. Then my favorite part is when you actually open up the text for them to begin looking at it and reading, before you have them just go ahead and start reading something like the Blimblatt, you're going to do a word search. So you actually point to, in popcorn fashion, the words on the page, but you're going to try to go to the ones that look a little easier first, like, what's this word? And, okay, what's this word? A, good. What's this word? To, all right. All right, little harder word. Okay, good. You know some big words. Let's go on to this one. Study, all right. Yet, meaning, okay. How about emphasize? Do you know what that means, right? You're asking them if they can say the word and if they know what it means. At this point, you're just checking to see if this passage that you're going to have them read is 93 to 97% known. And if it is, great. If not, you're not teaching yet. You're not having them sound it out, each word they come to. You're just looking to see which ones do they know. If they know it, great. If they don't know it, you might mark it down and then just keep going. You're always going to want to do it 3 to 1 though, to keep that success rate high. If you go to an unknown, just point to one that you already know they know so that you can end on a high note. And then you as the assessor decide, do they have enough information to go ahead and read this? Or is it going to be too hard? Is it going to be like the Blimblatt, right? And if it's a no, then we have to judge that first of all based on these numbers, right? So do they know 93 to 97% of the words in terms of recognition and word meaning? If it's yes, they can go ahead and read it. If it's no, we have to think about it. And if it's the Blimblatt, right, and it's 80% known, I might teach 4 or 5 words that's in their working memory. It doesn't teach all the unknown words. It leaves some so I can see what do they do in terms of decoding when they get to those unknown words. So I might just teach a few words. I might also have to put away that story if it's really too hard and go to their level material or create something. And then once I do have a match, then I have them read, and that's when I can look at word study and decoding, and that's when I can check their fluency. And I can check their responding in the same way that I check their listening, responding. And then we can decide, does that give us enough information to know where we want to prioritize? And if yes, great, but usually it doesn't. Usually the teacher is like, well, that was that story, but I don't know if they would do that if I'd use this other book that we're just starting. So you do it again in some new material until you get a consistent picture of what you want the priority to be. And of course, if you have other data available to you, like CBM, screening data and other things, you would use all of that information that the teacher already has to make that decision. All right, here we're getting into the fun. I'm looking at the time. Doing okay, actually. I think we got this. So I'll keep my part short. In fairness to the students, I said, well, our idea was that we wanted to give a case about each domain of reading. So I have one that's on word recognition, and we're going to talk about word recognition just being words that students can see and say within 3 seconds. Doesn't necessarily have to be the Dolch word list, but just what words they can see and say. So in fairness to them, I picked one from my internship days. It was one of my first cases in the field. Tina, I've changed her name to protect her, although she's probably like 30 years old now. So Tina is a 6th grade, or was a 6th grade student from Puerto Rico. She had moved in 2nd grade to the state where I was interning, and from Puerto Rico. And early on, they identified her as struggling. She received EL services, and then they found her eligible for IEP services as a student with a mild intellectual disability. She made little to no progress in those 3 years. I wasn't at the school at the time. I came late when she was in 6th grade. And I was introduced to her by the special educator who said, okay, she's going to be on your list of reevals later in the year. So I want you to take a look at her because we think she might need a more intensive placement when she goes to middle school. We're really worried about her because she hadn't made progress in 3 years. And we tried LIPS, we tried Reading 180, and she hasn't budged. And they did want a more restrictive kind of placement. So hopefully you're all thinking like I am, slow down here, right? Okay, wait a second. Sounds like some important steps were missed early on in the process. So maybe we need to go back, and it's September or October. We have some time to do some consultation if you'd like, and see if we can do something that might be helpful to us in the reevaluation process. So luckily the special educator was all on board. She met with the student in a resource room setting. So she had the student every day for reading. So she said, yeah, let's do it. I'll be your consultee. This sounds exciting. And we did it. We contracted, she was volunteered and agreed. And we did instructional assessment. And through that process, we noticed the student just really wasn't even able to read a lot of the lower level books that she had. And so we really quickly prioritized sight word recognition, figuring that if we gave her a base of words, that could at least get her started. Now, I've learned a lot about reading since then, so I might have probably taken a closer look at phonics if I went back and did it all over again. But for now, sight words was what we prioritized, and we collect baseline data and short-term goals. We picked the drill sandwich approach, which is the folding in strategy, which uses that instructional match ratio of 70% known words with 30% unknowns folded in. The special educator did that with her 1 time per day in that special ed setting. But then she did pocket words where she took those 3 unknown words and sent it back with the student to the regular ed classroom, where when she was joined or greeted at the door by the teacher would be like, oh, show me your words. Student would take them out of her pocket, they'd run through them, she'd get an extra repetition. When they lined up to go to lunch, show her words, get an extra repetition. When they came back from lunch, show her words. So she got a lot of repetition throughout the day. Then those same words were folded into teacher-made stories because the student wasn't able to read in any of the little books because she just had so few words, that we made books very easily and had the words that she knew with just a few of those unknown words peppered in a way that still made sense. They were kind of like simple sentences and had a lot of repetition. And let's see how she did. So at week 1, she had about 54 words. By week 4, she was already up considerably. So she had jumped up, quadrupled her word knowledge in 4 weeks' time, or let's see. Yeah, actually a little bit less than quadrupled, but she increased considerably, and also noted that she went up 3 guided reading levels in that time, which the teachers had previously reported to me. She hadn't jumped up guided reading levels in 3 years' time. And so this was kind of one of those aha moments. First of all, there's a little, I'm not going to get onto that tangent, but we could have been some tier 1 issue here that you might even hear that clue peppered in. But regardless of that, then she had this intervention, and now we can see a quick rate of learning with just a little bit of instructional match. And here they were thinking that she had a more intensive, severe intellectual disability. And if I had just gone and done my reevaluation work, we would not have ever seen this side of the student. So that's my little IC case, but I will turn it over now, and I will put myself on mute because these other students have great cases to share as well.
All righty, getting into our second case example, we are looking at a word study case. All right, so I worked with Hillary. We started off, me and the teacher, by contracting. That's something Dr. Kaiser has already reviewed. We moved on to PDIA, and we looked at the areas of concern for the specific student. The student was a third grade Hispanic female. She was having difficulty with reading, specifically reading at a first grade level, so 2 grade levels below. Overall difficulty decoding words, which led to her, of course, not reading fluently. She had poor handwriting and lack of responding to 8 questions from grade level text. So from there, the area of concern that we decided to hone in on was difficulty with decoding words. I did a couple of IAs with Hillary. We found that she had the most difficulty with multisyllabic words. The first IA, 7 out of 9 of her incorrectly read words were multisyllabic. I took some baseline. She knew 14 out of 30 words on a multisyllabic reading word list. We made her goal for 2 weeks because the semester was concluding, so we kind of had to move quickly on this one. So her goal for after 2 weeks of intervention, we wanted her to increase 2 words each week, leading to 18 out of 30 words after 2 weeks. If you guys don't know what Alconin boxes look like, we have a nice visual to the right over here. That was the intervention that we selected to use to increase Hillary's multisyllabic words and her ability to decode them. This was implemented 3 times a week by the consultee, so by the teacher. And as you guys can see, down at the bottom in the left, we see her graph. You can see that's her baseline over there. And then to the right side, we see she had 18 out of 30 words after 1 week. So she met her 2-week goal after 1 week. And then the second week when I collected progress monitoring, she had 24 out of 30 of her words. So she exceeded her goal. All right, that's it for Hillary. We're moving on to case study 3 now.
And I just wanted to say real quickly, I'm sorry, I'll let you go, Bailey, but that, I think one of the things to note is this is all done in the confines of a consultation case. So this is very time limited consultation, which may explain why you see, 2 data points as opposed to, 16 weeks or something like that. Go ahead.
So my case was on fluency. Go to the next one. Yeah. Okay. So my student was a 5th grade male. We'll call him Sam. He had ADHD, but he was recently taken off medication, and he was not receiving any special education services at this time. The teacher indicated that her main concerns were that he was easily distracted, he was unmotivated, he had outbursts of energy, and it was to the point where they were like sending him down the hall during, like in the middle of class, so he could get a drink or like walk to another teacher's room just to like get him out of the classroom and to like move around. So that was like a huge concern of hers. The teacher had been teaching for about 10 years, well, more than 10 years, I should say, but she had never had any formal consultation. In fact, she wasn't even sure that she wasn't aware that a school psychologist could help her in her classroom on an academic level. So we went through the typical steps of contracting. We discussed the expectations. We went through the problem-solving process just so she knew what that was going to look like. We discussed the limits of confidentiality, and we created a mutual agreement and a collaborative relationship. Yeah, that's basically when we started talking about how the student was unmotivated, but she was really open to learning new reading strategies. And we had a discussion on the instructional match, and right from the beginning, she acknowledged that there could have been more than just him being unmotivated and easily distracted and all of that. So I think that this case was so successful because the teacher was incredibly willing to grow and learn new strategies. And from the very beginning, she was talking about how she wanted to learn new things for her students in her class. So not just for this student, but to implement them class-wide. So we used that student documentation form to begin describing the concerns. So her initial concern was following directions in reading class. So that was pretty high inference. That was more that broken child mindset. But after discussing that a little further, then she went right into like the more academic, more reading dimension areas. So she really worked her way down that ladder of inference, and she switched her mindset to the more broken match mindset. So then she started talking about vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. It was interesting though, you do know this is a fluency case because I've already said that, but initially she was kind of talking about how fluency wasn't a huge concern because when she did a screener at the beginning of the school year, he was on grade level for the benchmark. So she wasn't really worried about his fluency because he met that benchmark. So we did 3 instructional assessments. So the first one was done with a social studies article or passage. So afterwards, we kind of figured that it might have been a little bit easier because she more or less gave it just because it was a good example of what they were learning about. So it might have been more like 4th grade, but he was able to fully read, comprehend the story. He was reading extremely quickly and wasn't using punctuation, but at that point, he was understanding it. So we did want to make sure that we wanted to see what he was like at a more 5th grade reading level. So then we did another instructional assessment. Again, was on instructional level. We did the word search. When I read to him, he comprehended 100% of the story. So that was his listening comprehension. And then when he read the next part of the passage to himself, he really struggled to answer the comprehension questions. Not exactly sure what that was. It's on a graph that I'll show you guys in a little bit. But yeah, he continued to read really quickly. He skipped a lot of words. He pronounced them incorrectly. He would hesitate. There wasn't much fluency at all. So when that teacher did the screener, yeah, he met the benchmark for 5th grade, but he also was reading so quickly that he wasn't understanding what he was reading. So his comprehension was really low. So we went on to do a 3rd instructional assessment. And at this point, myself and the teacher were starting to discuss those concerns with fluency and comprehension. So we decided that we were going to implement an intervention, the chunking intervention. So that's just when you take a sentence or a paragraph and you break it up into more meaningful, smaller chunks of information. So he would take the sentence and break it up in the middle just so that he could see each part of the sentence. But before we did that, he again read the passage without chunking, and his comprehension after that was a 50%. And then he did it with chunking. So we did the I do, we do, you do. That's how we kind of learned the chunking intervention together. So then he did that paragraph again, and he improved his comprehension to 67%. And then we did a new paragraph or part of the passage, and he used chunking from the start, and he had 100% on the comprehension part.
So if I could jump in real quickly, Bailey, to say what you're describing very nicely is something I didn't talk about in the overview of the IA, but it's really important, is that idea that teaching is a part of instructional assessment. It's very different than the other kind of assessments that we do as school psychs, where we're just collecting data and we're kind of like a blank slate. But by the time you get to your 3rd IA, you're starting to narrow it down and you see, is phrasing related to comprehension? You can start teaching that, right? So if this child's reading super fast, you can teach them a strategy by which to read for meaning, read for phrases, pause, read with intonation, and then assess their comprehension. And you can see, did that teaching actually impact their comprehension? That's called trial teaching, and that's part of Gickling's approach. And what you saw here is a really nice way to help them prioritize it, but also then to know what kind of strategy is going to work when they get to intervention design. So anyway, I just wanted to.
Yeah. So you can go to the next. Oh, yeah. Okay. So from there, we kind of figured that we talked about it and we discussed that fluency and comprehension were both a problem for Sam. So we came up with ways to measure these as we went along with the interventions. So for fluency, we found the 6-dimension fluency rubric from Fontes and Bunnell. And we just calculate the total number of points that he earned. And I'll show you guys that on the next slide. And then comprehension, we actually measured 2 different ways. So first was the percentage of comprehension questions answered correctly on weekly readings. And this was, he would just read to the teacher and then she would ask him questions after. And then he also did reading tests bi-weekly, and that was another way we measured it. So this is, it's kind of hard to see, but this is an example of the rubric we used. The only reason we really used it was just so that we had a way to quantify fluency, so we could look at the phrasing and the pausing and the rate of his reading. So when we went to look at interventions, we wanted to address fluency, comprehension, but also his attention difficulties. So we stuck with the chunking because we saw that it was effective during that third IA. But then we also decided to just do some underlining. So when he would read, he would get distracted in the middle of the text and he would start up again at a new point. So he might have started like 2 paragraphs below where he actually was. So just underlining it helped him see where he stopped so that he could go back and restart at that place or restart that paragraph over as he needed. And then also when he would be answering questions on reading tests or with me when I was doing some of the instructional assessments, he would lose track of the question he was working on. So he might have been working on number 1, he'd go look for it in the text. If he couldn't find it, he'd come back to number 4, try to look for that. So we just decided that putting an extra piece of paper over the questions that he wasn't working on might be helpful. Oh, go back one. Yeah, okay. So like I said, we monitored his weekly progress through an oral retelling. So this just was him reading a passage to his teacher, and she would use the fluency rubric to monitor his fluency. And then afterwards, he would answer questions more based on like retelling what he just read. I think there would be like 10 questions about what he just read, and we would graph that. And then also his comprehension was monitored bi-weekly through reading tests. So that was more independent reading to himself. And then I used this adherence checklist because there were quite a few steps to this intervention. So I just wanted to make sure that the teacher was implementing it with fidelity. And then this was also a way for me to look back and see if an intervention, if it wasn't working and he wasn't making progress, why. So maybe the chunking intervention wasn't being implemented, or, you know, we could go back and problem solve and either create new interventions that would work better for the student or try to make sure that we were doing the interventions we have better. So these are the graphs. As you can see, fluency, pretty much, I think that third data point actually was when we started that chunking intervention. And pretty much from there, he started increasing. He started doing more pausing, stopping at punctuation. His rate slowed down. He was understanding the story better. So it was out of 21 points. So by the third time he used the chunking intervention, he had 100%. As for comprehension, the blue line is the oral retellings that he would do weekly with his teacher. And you can see that he reached 100% after 2 trials with, or on both of the 2 trials with his teacher. So he was able to tell this passage that he just read back to his teacher. We didn't see as much success with the reading quizzes. So all this tells us at this point is that if I had more time, this would be an area that I would probably go back to and see what was impacting that, what was different about the reading quiz versus the oral retellings that he was doing weekly, so we could create new strategies for that. So bottom line, the teacher was able to move down that ladder of inference and identify reading difficulties and that they were not due to motivation or distraction. She learned how to assess for reading concerns and implement fluency phrasing interventions to improve his performance and other student performance possibly in the future. The student did improve his fluency phrasing and oral retelling, but he would still need some support in increasing accuracy on those biweekly comprehension quizzes. So if there was more time, like I said, I would circle back to that problem identification and analysis for the reading quizzes.
And I in case 4. So my case covered the reading comprehension responding dimension. I completed an instructional consultation case with a reading specialist teacher, which I have to be honest, in the spirit of full disclosure, was incredibly intimidating. She is a teacher that has been at the school for years and years and has a wealth of knowledge. And a lot of times I would ask her questions and she would just always have these beautifully exquisite answers. And I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to be able to work alongside this individual and actually have something to offer? But it was surprising to both of us how wonderful it turned out. So that was really cool. So initially we had discussed working together for one student, an 8th grade Caucasian female. She actually had a very small class of only 4 kiddos who were considered bubble kids because they were right on the cusp of moving from basic to proficient. So these were kids that did not have any additional services. No, they were not ELLs, no IEPs, no 504s, nothing. They were regular education kids that just needed a little something extra to help them to, develop more of their skills. So we spoke about this one person specifically who was reading below her grade level. She was reading approximately 6th grade reading level. And the teacher thought that initially she really could use some extra help because she believed that the gal's issues stemmed from a lack of self-confidence. So the teacher had said, this girl is very quiet. She really does not share her ideas in class. If you ask her questions, even if they are like really easy questions, she will not answer. She just kind of sits there and smiles. Even, when she's called upon her, she knows the answer. So we wanted to kind of delve deeper to see, what might be behind that behavior. But we knew that we definitely wanted to work with this girl. So we did go through all the stages listed that we've talked about. The first thing that we did, though, was I collected baseline data with her. We completed multiple instructional assessments with stories that were from a grade level text. And the reading specialist teacher was actually the one that went through, and she picked 3 different texts in particular that they were not going to read. She had no prior knowledge as far as seeing the text, so she wouldn't have seen vocabulary or anything like that beforehand. But these were 3 texts that she thought would be very good for us to work with. So I gathered information from those. And that's kind of on the right side here. Based on the information from the reading skills in those snapshots, we were able to get some more data. So on 2 of those snapshots, she knew the meaning of 98% of the words in the text. However, when we looked at the words that she did not know, they were very rich and complex words that really helped to make the text make more sense and really would have impacted the reading comprehension and her understanding what was happening. So we did feel that vocabulary was something that we could look at, and it would be impacting, her responses or her ability to answer questions. We also determined that when reading grade level text, she did score between 10th and 25th percentile for correct words per minute on the first 2 snapshots. And then on the 3rd and 4th, she scored between the 25th and 50th percentile. So fluency was also something that could have been a factor for her. Based on that information, and then we also reviewed some STAR data that STAR testing data that the teacher had. We looked at that and saw that the target student, she scored 900 on her August STAR test, which showed that her overall reading level was between a 5th and 6th grade level. Reading comp was between 3rd and 5th grade. And then on her PSSA, the year before, she had scored basic and got a C in her ELA class. So we were kind of trying to take the data from our IA, the STAR data, and really look at it all together to see what was really going to give us the biggest result and what was going to be best for this kid. And we decided that reading comprehension was what we wanted to work on. So when we prioritize reading comprehension, we really wanted to look at how we could do this, but also consider the concern of the teacher with this gal's self-esteem. So we wanted to ensure, especially because she's already kind of singled out, it was already a small class, there were only 4 students. So now she knew, because I had been working with her, we explained it to her, that we were going to do an intervention to work with her and help her. So now she also knew, on top of being singled out, kind of, and being a small class, now we're also going to do something else with her. So we wanted to ensure safety to her and her self-esteem by not really making this feel even worse for her. And so as we were talking through this, the teacher actually said, I think this is something that every student in this class could benefit from, working on this, this goal and working on reading comprehension, because every single one of these kids is in here and their reading comprehension is an area that could be improved. So we decided at that point, we were going to shift our intervention from a single subject with our target student, and we were going to move into a small group intervention. I can't talk that fast. So the intervention design that we looked at, we decided we wanted to work with is one that's called forming questions. And basically this is a metacognitive strategy that helps students understand how questions are formed and derived from texts. So a lot of times, even when kids read texts, they're not sure how to pull out the main idea. They're not sure where the questions come from. They don't know how to prepare for a test because they're not sure what you're going to ask. It could be anything. And even in the consultative process, I asked this teacher, I think reading comprehension is actually quite a difficult thing to teach. How is that something that you teach? Like, what strategies do you use? What have you seen has been successful for you? And she even herself said, you know what, it is really tough. And at the end of it, neither of us had a really clear answer as far as what the best way to do that was. These kids still really struggled, and she struggled in a way of figuring out what the best way to teach them or how to do that. So this intervention seemed to be one that, she felt was going to be easy to teach, and she also felt that the students would accept. So they are middle school students. They can be tricky sometimes. You have to really kind of sell that it's a cool thing to do. This class is actually 3 girls and 1 boy. So really trying to get them to be interested in color coding, we thought would be okay, but you never really know. So the way this works is you're actually teaching them to look for things in the text that they can pull questions from. And you're doing this by using the 5 W questions: who, what, where, when, why. So the first thing that you do is really teach the intervention. You're going to write the who, what, where, when, why on the board, talk to them about what those things actually mean. So who, what is a who? That's a person, a character from the text. And then you're going to show them that you're going to designate the who with a blue box. So as Vanna White here is so nicely showing you, the blue box is around the jellyfish because that's the who in that first sentence. So then you're going to, after you teach all of these different 5 W's and what the coding means, you can show them how they can start to create those questions. So just as a really quick answer, because this is kind of small to see, if you say Johnny went to the store and I put a blue box around Johnny, Johnny's the who, then I can very quickly come up with a who question from that. Who went to the store? The answer's in the blue box. The answer is Johnny.
Or even here, Katie, I think if we put the who over jellyfish, right? Who are the world's oldest multi-organ animals,
Yeah.
Right? Like that. And then the kid, sometimes you even do it with Post-it notes, and you can pick up the Post-it note, and they're like, "Oh, the answer's right there." Yeah. Kind of like, whoa, Anyway, keep going.
Absolutely. And the other cool thing is you can really kind of make this your own. You can have them work together with another student and ask each other questions. But this really helps them to locate those things. And then we decided for this intervention that, she could do an oral retelling, but then because there's only 4 kids, if she pulls them back in a small group and says, okay, tell me what you remember, then the other kids might hear that. So she decided just to have them write down, a couple sentences to kind of summarize the text. And they learned that their summary needed to include these main components. So we created a rubric together that would be a really easy checkoff list for this teacher. And initially it looked like the one that you see here, where we gave points whether they could just say what the who was unaided. So she could mention jellyfish, she got that 4 points for that one. If you had to give her some assistance or give her some choices, or go back to the text and look at the text, say right in this section, then obviously she got less and less points as you went down the rubric. That required a little bit more time from the teacher. And it also, we felt as time went on, it really wasn't giving an accurate representation of how much these kids were actually improving. And she said, it didn't take long, maybe a week or two, I can't even remember exactly because we switched pretty quickly. She said, you know what, it doesn't matter to me how they get the answer. I want to know if they can do it themselves or not. So if they get it, they get the point. If they didn't get it, they didn't get the point. Because in middle school, they're going to have to take the PSSAs. They're not going to get all of these extra little prompts. So I really want them to be able to do this independently. So we moved quickly over to just kind of eliminating those other columns and really was a checklist for the teacher. She got the paragraph. Did they get the who? Yes. What? Yes. And she could very quickly say how many points out of 5. And this is actually the jellyfish one that you see there is actually the first one that we used with this target student to show her how to do this. Really cool anecdotally, when she finished, she said, "Can I take this with me?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely. But can I please make a copy? Because this is so cool and you did such a great job." So she was actually very excited about this intervention. She felt like she got like a sneak peek, and she was actually a little special because when the teacher went to teach it to the class, she already knew what the intervention was. So the teacher and her kind of exchanged this eye contact and smile, and she kind of had that one up above everybody else, which made her feel special instead of the opposite of what we wanted. So it worked out really well. So then this is the data from hers. Her first 3 are the baseline that we gathered from her working with me. So that was prior to her doing anything with the intervention at all. And then you'll see from 4 to 9, that's when the intervention took place in her classroom when she was doing this with the rest of her class. She made some significant progress and growth with the intervention. And when it was eventually faded, she was also very successful. You'll see the last little orange dot over at the 10. She was able to remember details with 100% accuracy without using the color coding at all. So that's really the ideal. That's what we wanted for her. And she felt really good about that. She was able to see how she was doing, see her progress, and feel good. She was answering more questions in class. She was participating without being asked. Her overall affect changed. And those are things you can't really put on a graph, but we know as, counselors, psychologists, that is really important for kids' mental health and, their self-confidence to be able to feel confident. So that was a win for us, an extra win. So then we graphed the group data together. These other 3 kids did not have baseline. So we decided to move to the group intervention after we had already worked with her because we didn't really have that intention up front. So there was no baseline collected for them. So it could appear that they would have made progress without, but we can, easily see that this intervention helped them because they immediately showed progress as soon as we started it. So the significance might have been more accurately represented if we had a baseline, but we can still see that it was very successful for them as well. I'm skipping some of this because I know we're getting close. So as far as benefits, the students obviously showed the positive effects. They actually verbalized on their own. This is like the ideal situation. So no prompting, we didn't pay them to say it, but a couple of them said, I could see myself using this in other classes. Like, wow, that's amazing. That's exactly what we want. It impacted them. All of them are feeling good about it. The teacher would sometimes get ready to start class and they would raise their hands. Are we going to do the color coding today? Can we please do that? They loved it. And then also an impact on the students is that it impacted their teacher. So Dr. Kaiser talked about before, like when teachers are impacted, that's a tier 1, because the teachers being impacted and changing their the way that they're doing things is impacting all students. So this teacher actually verbalized that she was thinking more about her thinking about how she was doing things, realizing how impactful this was for not only these students, but she found a way to generalize this into another class that she was a co-teacher for. She was working with one student and said, you know what, let me teach you a strategy. She started to teach the student the strategy. And one of the 4 kids that was in this group was in there, looked up, they did the whole smile, eye contact thing. So it's just cool that they were both recognizing that this intervention can be used in other places and is very successful. It's helpful. So the strengths, obviously, the student responses, the teacher responses, it was very accepted. It was very easy. It didn't really take a whole lot of time. It was simple. Even just creating the chart together, and I printed a bunch of them off for her. It didn't take me much time, but just saying like, hey, I'll copy this for you. She knew that we were in this together, and the intervention, it was not about her doing all the work. It was about the team and working together to help her help the kids. The teacher was part of this process the whole time. And limitations.
Go ahead.
Just that we didn't have the baseline and we couldn't do the generalization data just due to scheduling changes at that point. The semester had ended. We did try to get fading points for all of the students. Obviously, our target student, we had some. The other 3, it didn't really work out. One kid left before the bell, didn't answer the questions. Another kid was having a really bad day, didn't get it done. So had I put the scores that we were able to collect, it really wouldn't have been accurate either. But I think overall, we can at least see that it was really beneficial.
It sure was, Katie. Thank you. And thank you, Bailey and Hannah. Those are excellent cases. And to think, these are just their initial cases, right? They have so much more amazing things to come. It's so wonderful. And each one really exemplified what can happen with instructional consultation, not only for the students, but for the teachers too. You could hear so much teacher change in each of those examples. And then, additionally to see Katie's example, which is really the big picture of our goal of enhancing student and staff performance. She helped move the teacher, she helped move the student, and we could see direct application to multiple students. But now we have, kind of our last 5 minutes, and I'm seeing a lot going on in the chat. And I just want to call attention to that, because I think this is probably where you're mostly thinking is like, how do we do some of this, right? I see Kevin is saying, wow, like how powerful for us, right? How much progress to see database assessment and intervention, what it can do, and how differently we might perceive a child in our own evaluation process if we do some of this work. And I'm looking down, I see time is the issue, right? Holly's saying, I like that it emphasizes skills that the student has, really a strengths-based approach. But the question is maybe how do we do this as school psychs? So I might even just open it up for whatever questions you might have, or ideas that you might have about how to make this doable or doneable, as one of the principals said. You can take yourself off mute if you're more comfortable, or if you want to write something in the chat.
I find that this, and I made a comment, and hopefully you can see me, I can on screen, but I find that this is very similar to kind of the testing of limits principle, which I find incredibly useful in even in the standardized assessment, where let's take math computation for example, where a student's skipping all the division problems. It's like, all right, well, first what that symbol means and the concept of division. All right, let's go through that, and then I walk them through a long division process, because usually it's the long division that they don't remember. And have them try to apply that to a novel problem. And half the time they can within that one trial of learning. So, I feel like this is a very similar concept that I'm happy to hear and see these results, commenting there. But You know, I think the techniques of the instructional assessment are something that really resonates with me. And I just hope, you know, one of the barriers that I foresee is kind of the administrative pushback from, hey, you know, let's do this instead of doing a reevaluation. Like, let's put together like a plan to implement an intervention based on an instructional assessment, and you know, monitor progress and see the data. You know, that might be one of the barriers, at least in my setting, and I'm not sure if that's across the board. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. And I think you're naming one of the big barriers that we face in our field is always the ultimate resource time. That's our limited resource, and how to figure out how to handle that issue, right? So if you have a realistic caseload where you have to do evaluations, the time is already ticking on your 60 days, and you have to do that by law. But to the extent that we can include some of this in that same problem solving, we have a lot of autonomy in our role to include this also in an evaluation, right? So if you have that 60 days and you have to do the testing, that's also 60 days to potentially start instructional consultation simultaneously and show up at the meeting with one of these graphs, in addition to your other standardized assessments. You know, I know that sounds easy for me to say because I'm in my university office, but it is something that I did spend a good amount of time with. And like my case with Tina, I will say also timing is really important. So like I knew that reevaluation was coming, but I didn't have to do it till the spring. So before actually things started getting signed and my timeline started ticking, I knew I could start IC early in September and October. Now this year, I know that that's really hard for many of you because you had your timeline already starting from last year and you had to really hit the ground running. But usually that's kind of a lull, right, in schools because you haven't gotten all your referrals yet because the teachers are just getting to know their students. And so if you can start IC in those first few months of school, you can, and not wait, because a lot of teachers might already have an idea of who's struggling early in the school year, but they just kind of think like, let me try my own thing. And they usually try it on their own. But if you can suggest like, hey, let's go ahead and get started on this now. What do you think? You might be able to head off some of your evaluations too. And, you know, that often I will do like a little pitch at a faculty meeting. You know, in my early days, I would, you know, just explain who I was and what instructional consultation was. And I said, if you're just starting to scratch your head, here's the request for assistance and we can get started. And, you know, you don't have to suspect a disability. You just have to know like something's a mismatch and we will work on it. And that often really helped as well too, because, you know, we could often do a lot of this work and then the teacher would be more objective and not even think that it might be an evaluation. And then I actually have less testing time in my role. So it's not even something that I have to get pressure from the administration from, because I've actually prevented some of that from even happening. But it does take a certain level of confidence and efficacy in the consultation itself too. And I think that's also a big barrier for us. The research is pretty clear that school psychs don't spend that much time in consultation, not formal consultation like we talk about here. And that has to do with training. So if you haven't been well trained in it, you're going to be less likely to offer it and do it. If you haven't been well trained in reading or math, for example, you're going to feel less confident to want to offer your support with that with teachers in terms of instructional design. So, you know, I think you guys are doing the right thing by coming to these kinds of sessions and trying to build that skill set in your professional development, because then you're going to be more likely to find the time if you feel efficacious and confident in doing it. That brings us, I think, pretty much to our last minute. Gosh, these sessions are short. Either that or I just jam pack it. But let's just take a look. So one thing I will say is we are starting to do the work online. My consultation class now is doing instructional consultation remotely. We picked up a lot of that from the work of Aaron Fisher. He's written pretty prolifically about teleconsultation, even pre-pandemic. There's a webinar available from APA Division 16 if you haven't seen it, and some handouts I've linked here. And then Matt Burns is starting to do some videos on how do you do curriculum-based measurement, at least remotely. Some of them are, you know, he's got some outtakes and stuff in there, but it at least gives us some thought about how we can do it, especially if you're feeling like your hands are tied, like I can't do standardized assessment and I don't know how to be helpful. There are ways that we can kind of try this out. And once my students who are in class now get through their cases, once we can get permission to share it, hopefully we'll have some good training cases to share on teleconsultation. But I want to thank my participants again. I mean, not my co-presenters, my former students and now off into this world. They're doing such great work. So if you want to reach out to any of them, their names and emails are here. Someone's saying, do I recommend a training to participate in? We don't have any ICAT like trainings that are going on in this area. I'm not trying to bring on more work for myself, but I am an approved trainer. So if this is something that you and your school district are legitimately interested in, we can always talk about what that might look like to do some training locally. But I know that there's not currently like a school district that's contracting with ICAT resources. But that is something that we could always talk about. So, you know, reach out to me and maybe we can discuss that further. And if you like this, fill it out in the evaluation form and maybe we'll do something like a more specific mini skills next year too. But we thank you all so much for your time. And I think this is it. We're over. Have a good night and look forward to seeing everybody in the Burn Writer lecture tomorrow.